Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the major challenges confronting all 8 billion people on the planet. My guest is an expert on this topic. Mr. Jerry Glenn is a futurist who serves as the executive director of the Millennium Project. He authors an annual publication, State of the Future. He's been the executive director of the American Council for the United Nations University and the Deputy Director of Partnership and Productivity International. He was also a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer from 1968 to 1970 in Malawi. Jerry Glenn, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Nice to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. We're all former Peace Corps volunteers here. We could have a reunion almost. Yes. Jerry, let's just jump right into it. What is the Millennium Project? It's one of the most interesting I think I've ever seen in my life, and one of the certainly most substantive. But what is it?
It's a global participatory think tank, decentralized. We're not in one building. We're in 71 countries around the world, and we call these nodes, where it's an intersection of two or more networks. So idea is that a node is a group of individuals and institutions that connect global and local perspectives on the world, and that some are from government, some are from UN systems, some are from NGOs, some are universities, some are business. So we want to have a mix. So we do global futures research, not on behalf of any one country or ideology or issue, but like the human game itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly a very interesting project, and our viewers can go to your website at www.millennium-project.org to get more information.
Spelled the English way, not the French way. Two L's and two N's. Two L's and two N's.
Two L's, two N's. Don't make that mistake. Well, good. Well, let's jump into it. You've identified 15 global challenges we have, and let's just start off with a couple of them and see how far we get. One, and we keep talking about it, I know we do, but it's so important, and that is climate change. How do you balance promoting sustainable development with this climate change crisis that we have right now?
Well, one of the things that has not been addressed well is the option of making meat without animals. Agriculture and livestock is one of the biggest methane and greenhouse gas and CO2 contributors, along with transportation industry. But we talk about transportation, not so much about that. So one of the big opportunities here is to begin to change our food diet. Now, jump up to about 1,000 parts per million. We're around 425 or so parts per million now, CO2. If we ever get to 1,000, something happens that people are also not talking about. And that is the deoxygenation, the conveyor belt that brings the oxygen down to the bottom of the ocean. That stops. When that stops, little microorganisms that don't grow well in oxygen all of a sudden proliferate all over the oceans, all of the oceans. And when they die, they emit sulfur dioxide. That's a poison. When people talk about climate change being an existential risk, that is the thing that finishes off. It's not just simply the sea level rise. That's a big deal, and the temperature. But the poison gas is what finished off the Permian extinction some years ago. So one, look at the long term. Two, short term food industries.
Are we making any headway in looking at creating meat and not having cattle and that type of thing?
Yeah. People confuse this, what has been done, which is Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger. Those are plant-based, which is better than nothing, but it still requires a lot of vegetables, a lot of land, a lot of water, and a lot of all that. But if you go from genetic material directly, you don't need as much land, water, energy, all that sort of stuff. You get pure meat. Singapore, right now you can get pure meat chicken. So that's in the game. The same company with the chicken pure meat is halfway through the process of certification in the United States, so it may happen. So we know how to do this. The problem has been scaling up. It's one thing to produce 1,000 units a day. It's another to produce 10 million units a day. And that's where we are right now. And the faster that gets done, the faster we can start to turn around climate change.
And of course, one of the closely related items to this whole climate change issue and the sustainable development is water, clean water that people can use. So often we see where people are fighting over water now. I mean, water
Correct.
in some areas is more valuable than a barrel of oil.
Correct.
So
It is. It is. Yeah.
where are we in that, balancing that out and providing, potable
Right.
water to people who need it?
Yeah. As many of your listeners probably know, the water tables are falling all over the world, and controlled by a set number of countries around the world, and so the conflict potential there is gigantic. So one of the big things, also, I'm trying to talk about the things that don't get talked about so much, is coastline saltwater agriculture. You can irrigate with salt water. There's plenty of stuff that grows in salt water, and with genetic engineering, there's even more being done in China and the United States. We can convert an awful lot of agriculture to saltwater agriculture. Think of the coastlines of the world. I mean, millions and millions of miles of coastline. A lot of it is terrible. We don't want to take the good stuff like the Riviera coast, but a lot of Somalia, for example, could be used, for example. Now, this area, you can then produce shrimp, high-priced stuff. You can produce algae for energy. You can produce all kinds of other feedstock for other animals and for us. So the more we can move from freshwater agriculture to saltwater agriculture, we free up more fresh water and then less of a conflict between urban and farming.
That's a fascinating approach, and you don't hear much about that. That's the sad
Just trying to
part.
pick those things you don't hear about.
Right. That's right. Please do. Well, and then
you got an educated audience, so I don't want to tell them what they already know.
There you go. Well, you're right. It's worldwide, and they're up to date on large number of the issues. But we go right to the next group: population increase. And how do we bring population increases in balance with the resources? This is not an infinite planet of resources. We have finite resources, but how do we do that?
Right. Well, a whole lot of ways. Again, I'll try to bring up some things that aren't brought up as well. We're in a process of creating what's called synthetic biology, which is different than simply gene editing. You take gene editing, you take some genes out, put something else in, and you got a rose that glows at nighttime, and it's still a rose. Synthetic biology, you sit in front of a computer, you're taking different genetic materials and data banks, putting them together, and you create a whole new DNA that's never been there before. So you can create materials and processes and foods and things that nature has been producing that we don't know how to do yet, but we can learn how to do these things. That is going to make the efficiency of resource utilization surprisingly efficient. Nanotechnology is going to be coming into the fore more, and that makes things far more efficient because it's very precise. The next step is atomically precise manufacturing. That's where you put an atom exactly where you want to. That means your efficiencies in these areas will get much better. So we'll get much more out with much less input. And there's a lot of work being done now on urban improvements. So I don't need to go into that because that's well underway. So these are a couple of things to make the things far more efficient than we thought.
Whereas one of the reasons that we've been able to do a lot of what we've been able to do has been because of, in the United States in particular, because we've had a relatively functioning democracy over the years. But even though it's under siege right now, it seems like there's a worrisome trend around the world that authoritarian regimes are starting to make a comeback, so to speak. I'm not sure if they ever left, but 10, 15 years ago, it was a wave of democracy. And now we see people questioning democracy. We see it right here in the United States. How do you perceive that as far as this country and what's going on maybe with Orban in Hungary or former Duterte in the Philippines or whatever, as well as to the ability of the countries to survive and to prosper in the future?
One of the another unsold part of that dance is how extensive information warfare has become. I'm not talking propaganda, because that's when it hits you. I'm not talking about cyber stuff, cyber warfare, because that's where you destroy something, you know about it. Information warfare is when you don't know you've been hit. It's the whole idea. So some of this was done in the 2016 election, but now the software capabilities have greatly improved, and the precision of what terms used for what person, who then relays it to another person. So you end up with a proliferation of nonsense that people think is real. But the information warfare is a problem because we don't know where to draw the line. In other words, if someone has an aircraft carrier and blows up something, you say, okay, that's crossed the line. How much manipulation of people's information do you have to do without their knowing it before you say it's a war? We don't know how to conclude it. Now, there are answers to that, but it's way too complex to explain in this sort of show. But people have to understand that with the new advances in artificial general intelligence, you can get to an individual person with individual information to get them to say, I don't like X, to eventually say, I hate X, to eventually say, X is the enemy. That's the transition, and that's breaking up societies. You break up societies, dictatorships can work easier.
Is that what's happening with, say, with Facebook and the QAnon rabbit hole
Facebook is
scenario,
useful.
that type of thing?
Facebook is the medium. I mean,
Sure, yes.
It's not that Facebook is running the information warfare, but they are the unwitting fool.
Mm-hmm. They are participating, an unwilling participant, shall we say.
Right.
That may actually be it. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you've been involved with a PBS or community access television station or an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows, you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at a wide range of global issues that impact all of us on this planet. My guest is an expert on this topic. Mr. Jerry Glenn is a futurist who serves as the executive director of the Millennium Project. Jerry, we're talking about these 15 challenges that we have in the world, and these are not small challenges, to put it mildly. But going back to this autocracy and democracy, what do you think can be done? We have to be aware of what's happening when we're unwittingly led down into this rabbit hole of QAnon or some other nefarious source or whatever. But what can be done to tighten that up and to help us to use these social media platforms for the good and not brainwashing people?
Right now, the approach is to identify stuff and counter it. That's like treading water. You'll eventually drown. We have to take all of the information about disinformation and information warfare ploy, stick it into a set of data banks and pull them together and use it for a predictive analytics so that you could say, next week, this is the range of potential nonsense that may come up. And the week after that, so you end up with a rolling set of forecasts, and each one create, how do you counter that? Once you know how to counter that, then that can match a Facebook profile, just like a Facebook profile matches an advertising company. What personality do you need, what knowledge, what language, whatever, to counter a particular forecasted information warfare activity? What do you need? So then you go through your Facebook stuff, who matches those profiles, and say, hey, would you like to play your part in countering information warfare? If so, sign up for this press conference or whatever the heck it is. So the idea here in a nutshell is we have to anticipate, not simply respond to information warfare. And once we learn how to anticipate the range, then figure out how do you intervene so that it doesn't happen. We have to prevent these things, not simply identifying them after the fact.
But most people, it seems like, I haven't checked the polls lately, but most people seem to like market economies as opposed to command economies or different ones like that. How do we get the market economy, and I'm really focusing on the United States right now and some of the South American countries, get back on a more even keel to have more of a balance between the rich and the poor? The economies, maybe it's not the economies, maybe it's the policymakers in the capitals that are doing it, but they've really tilted in favor of the rich. You can see it through legislation, through regulations, through subsidies to people who really don't need subsidies. But how can you get this seesaw back into a more even kilter where the income gap shrinks? Not that anyone's against anyone being rich or earning money, it's not that, but how do you get them to pay their fair share?
Well, one of the things that's beginning that needs to grow real fast is these GoFundMe or different sort of websites to say, hey, I have this new business or this new idea, can invest in me. One of the ways that very wealthy people make a lot of money and the concentration of wealth continues is the management of investments. The vast majority of the money is run by investment houses. you know, but the average person doesn't know how to play in the investment game. They don't know what an IPO is and so forth. So what we got to do is have these little websites where people come on and say, hey, I am doing X and I want to invest. And so that the average person could invest maybe $1 or $2. The more we get poor people learning how to invest in the next steps of the economy, the next businesses and so forth, then they can share in the growth of the wealth from the bottom up for real. As long as we have artificial intelligence increasing the ability of the concentration of wealth to go, this problem is going to get a lot worse with future AI. So we very rapidly have to figure out how do we get the lower bottom into the investment game, into supporting local small business, all the rest of that sort of, and individuals on a global basis. Right now, you have to go to a job, you have to walk to the work or whatever. But an individual like yourself, you find markets for yourself around the world. You're making a living out of being you. What are you interested in? You're doing what you're interested in. So you're an example of the future kind of employment where we actually connect to markets worldwide and make a living individually, but then also people investing into that. The combination of those two things can help.
And we are all involved in dealing with these problems and these global challenges and these issues. Well, one group that plays a critical role, maybe more than any other group, I'm not going to say for sure, is that of women and girls too. And we've seen study after study that shows that if you empower women and girls, you educate them, you give them a little money to help set up a business or whatever the case might be, that they become a much more productive member in not only in the family, but also in the community and throughout the whole region. How important is it to empower women? I know the UN, through their Sustainable Development Goals, they've got one goal to empower women and girls. They focus on empowering women through almost all the UN programs. But how important is it to help women to achieve their full capacity?
It can be argued that changing the role and acceptance of women in all facets of life, almost all facets of life, is the challenge, if addressed well, affects all the other 14. I mean, everything is affected. And we've been charting this progress for the last 25 years or so, and progress is being made. It's a true statement, but it's really damn slow. It should have gone a lot faster. And this is where the media, I think, has got to come in. We have to have people seeing women in different positions. The more we do that, the more it inspires the next generation and opens up the log jams of what's possible. One of the things I would like to see done in school systems around the world, when they have physical education, teach martial arts. A woman that has been in first grade through 12th grade with martial arts rather than volleyball training, they got to train something in physical, right? Why not martial arts? So the average male, probably, if grown up in such a system, is not likely to attack or give a hard time to a woman who has maybe 3 black belts by the time of 12 years have gone by. I think that the physical parity is part of the whole game. I mean, aside from we want to stop the violent stuff, even aside from that, it should be obviously done. But it also gives a woman a bit more confidence, knowing that she's a 3-belt black belt, not simply a physical confidence, also mental confidence. And so the education systems, the world are teaching physical educations. Well, okay, we'll teach something serious like martial arts rather than just how do we do dodgeball and run around the yard.
You mentioned a minute ago artificial intelligence, and this is such a broad area, and we could spend days on it. But how do you define artificial intelligence, and what do we need to be concerned about as we watch this unfold? I know you've been involved and some major conferences on it. Maybe you could give us a little insight into what happened. I know one back in February and one recently, I believe, but could you talk a little bit about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, what we're seeing right now with Chat GPT and GPT-4 is very much like the Wright brothers compared to a rocket ship. What we have now is narrow intelligence. Next will be general intelligence, and then after that is super. The difference between narrow is that it's a narrow purpose. You know, it rewrites your stuff. It does some code. It does whatever, you know, it searches stuff. General is like us in the sense that it can draw on everything. It can make robot phone calls because it's imitating a human being. It's passing the Turing test, and it can use other artificial intelligences, and it can rewrite its own code very rapidly. So it goes very fast in becoming more and more intelligent till it becomes an independent intelligence beyond us. That's the superintelligence. That's the warning. So what we need, and this is where the UN comes in, we need a UN convention on artificial general intelligence. I serve on the IEEE narrow intelligence standards things, and it's very hard to get people to go to the next step. Right now, they're talking about they want to control the present, but we have to get ahead. Again, we have to get ahead of these things. Artificial general intelligence could come within 10 years. How long does it take to get a UN convention and a governance system? A long time. We both know that. All right, so that's why I'm so much energy in my voice. Now is the time to panic about what people are talking about. That's why the guy out of Google just left. You saw that. And that's why there's a movement for a moratorium. People are beginning to realize we've got to come up with rules of the game, a convention, and all the countries got to play in it, and a governance system. If we don't do that fast, then we have to pray that the evolution beyond our understanding is good, and there's no guarantee.
Mm-hmm. And you made a very prophetic statement a minute ago. You said that these countries want to control the system of the unfolding of AI, but at the rate it's going, it may control them if they don't get a handle on it very quickly. What can be done to expedite? I know the UN brings the countries of the world together, all right. 193 basically, but what can be done to expedite that, bring it to their attention, and
as
get them to move?
Right. As you know, the way the rules of the game work at the UN is a country. Yep. A country has to go to the General Assembly and say, we think a convention on artificial general intelligence, not just AI, people just go back to general intelligence, needs to be done. So everybody says, yay, let's do it. And then a committee gets formed. They work on the rules and so forth, and then eventually becomes a convention and then ratify. And then we have to have a governance system for it. So the first step is a country has to walk up to that microphone and say, we want a general intelligence convention. Schools of diplomacy should teach the potential futures for synergetic relations, not just zero-sum relations. So if we could get, let's say, China and the United States into a synergy for AGI, or get United States and China synergy on global climate change, Secretary General recommended that last time, the more we think about synergy relations instead of zero-sum relations, then a lot of these things fall away. Like, why are you unethical? Because you're worried that guy's going to get too much power. But if you're looking at synergy, you don't have to worry about the ethics because you're in the process of figuring out how do we work it out.
That's exactly what we need to do. And we see two events that are coming up very quickly. One is the saber rattling between China and the United States, talking about who's gaining ground, who's losing ground. They need to be cooperating and not confronting each other. That's the last thing we need is a war there. And we're going to run into this right now with the Iranian nuclear deal. We were warned back during the Trump administration not to pull out of it. Iran was abiding by the nuclear deal. It was working, but it didn't resonate with Donald Trump and his allies, and they pulled out of it. And now we're stuck with this situation where it looks like Iran is going to develop, well, it certainly has the capacity to develop a nuclear weapon, and we're going to have to deal with that without going to war. And there are people right now recommending we go to war, which is the last thing we need to do. But let me ask you, Jerry, these are all important issues. They're vital issues. What would you suggest to our viewers today to help us better understand them and to get involved in helping to overcome these problems?
Well, we're a global participatory think tank, which means that any domesticated primate can play. And the way that you can play is to just go to a website that Bill just mentioned, millennium-project.org, and you can click on the 15 global challenges, and you can see what is in there. And if you got better ideas, then add them in the system. This is how it's an emerging system. It keeps evolving. So if you got good ideas or you think our ideas are bad, then say so.
All ideas are welcome, right, Jerry?
Right.
Exactly.
And get your country to introduce AGI convention.
There you go. That's
the
right.
most important thing right now.
Call your prime minister, president, whatever the case might be. Well, Jerry Glenn, this has been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.